At their engagement ceremony, her fiancé stood up and said, "My ex will remain in my
we call
life.
off this engagement.
We come together. Either you accept that, or we call off this engagement." Everyone stared at her in silence, but she simply smiled and replied, "All right." And then, "Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty place a crown of honor upon every woman, a strength that does not break, a dignity that no voice can take, and a light that continues to shine even when the world grows dark. A woman carries pain quietly, loves deeply, forgives endlessly, and still stands with grace. She is the beginning of every home, the root of every generation, the breath of every prayer whispered before dawn. So, my family, let us hold her with respect, speak to her gently, stand beside her proudly. A woman's heart is not a place for wounds. It is a sacred garden God Himself shaped with love. Honor her today and always, not with words alone, but with how you treat her, how you protect her, and how you value her presence in your life. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, 'I am with Mr. Peter.'" The champagne had been poured. The flowers had been arranged perfectly. The guests had traveled from different states to witness what everyone called the perfect love story. Karen Smith stood in the center of the ballroom, wearing an engagement dress that had taken her 3 months to save for, surrounded by 200 people who had come to celebrate her future. The string quartet played softly in the background. Her sister Diane was crying happy tears in the corner. Joe Scott's parents were beaming with pride at their only son. Everything was absolutely perfect until the moment it wasn't. Joe stood up with his champagne glass, and Karen thought he was about to make a beautiful toast. Instead, he cleared his throat with the kind of authority that made the entire room fall silent, and said words that would echo in her mind forever. "I need everyone to understand something. My ex is still a part of my life. We grew together, and I can't just cut her off. We come together. If you accept that, we move forward. If not, we end this right now." The silence that followed was the kind that pressed against eardrums. Karen felt 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her, waiting for the show they'd come to see. They wanted tears streaming down her face. They wanted screaming and throwing things. They wanted her to beg or collapse or throw her ring at his face with dramatic flair. She could hear her mother gasp from across the room. She could see Joe's mother's hand fly to her mouth in absolute horror. She could feel Diane starting to move toward her, ready to defend, ready to attack, ready to destroy Joe Scott where he stood. But something happened in that moment that surprised even Karen herself. A strange calm washed over her, the kind that comes when you realize the worst thing has already happened and you're still standing upright. She looked at Joe, really looked at him for perhaps the first time, and saw him clearly. He wasn't trying to hurt her. That would have been easier to understand. He genuinely believed he was being honest, modern, evolved. He thought this was a conversation, not an execution. Karen lifted her face, and the smile that crossed her lips was so genuine, so serene, that it unsettled everyone more than tears would have. "All right," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with perfect clarity. She set down her champagne glass with a gentle clink that sounded like a gavel in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming to what has been a truly enlightening evening." Then she walked, not ran, not stumbled. She walked with her spine straight and her head high, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like a drumbeat announcing something important. She walked past Joe's mother, who tried to grab her arm with desperate apologies already forming. She walked past her own mother, who was crying openly now. She walked past the guests, who parted like water, and she walked straight out those double doors into the night air without looking back even once. Diane caught up with her in the parking lot, still holding her purse and phone. "Karen, wait." "Oh my God, wait." Karen turned, and Diane expected to see her sister finally break apart. Instead, Karen's face was eerily peaceful in the dim parking lot lights. "Did you hear what he said in there?" Everyone heard what he said in there. "Karen, I'm going to kill him. I'm actually going to go back in there and kill him with my bare hands." "No," Karen said, and her voice had a quality Diane had never heard before. It was quiet, but it carried weight, like steel wrapped in silk. He just did me the biggest favor of my life. He showed me exactly who he is before I made a permanent mistake. They drove home in Diane's car, and for the first 20 minutes neither of them spoke a single word. Then Diane said quietly, "You're scaring me. You should be crying. You should be angry. You should be something other than this calm." "I am something," Karen replied, staring out the window at the city lights blurring past. "I'm awake. For the first time in years, I'm completely awake." When they got back to the small apartment they shared, Karen kicked off her heels and sat on the couch. The engagement dress that had cost her 3 months of savings suddenly felt like a costume for someone else's life. Diane hovered nearby, completely unsure what to do. "Do you want ice cream, wine, a baseball bat so we can go smash his car windows?" Karen laughed, and the sound was strange in the quiet apartment. "Do you remember that lawyer who kept calling me? The one about grandmother Phyllis?" Diane frowned with obvious confusion. "The grandmother who cut off Mom and never spoke to us." "What about her?" "She died 3 months ago. The lawyer said something about an estate. I've been ignoring the calls because I was so focused on planning the wedding, and I figured it was probably just some old furniture or maybe a small insurance policy." Karen pulled out her phone and stared at the list of missed calls from the law firm. There were 17 of them spanning 3 months. "Are you seriously thinking about estate lawyers right now?" "Karen, you just had your engagement destroyed in front of 200 people. Call it shock or call it clarity. But right now, I need something to focus on that isn't Joe Scott's face." Karen dialed the number before she could second-guess herself. It rang 4 times before a man answered, his voice professional but warm. "Sterling and Associates, this is Richard Sterling speaking." "This is Karen Smith. I apologize for not returning your calls. I understand you've been trying to reach me about my grandmother." There was a pause. Then the man's voice took on a different tone entirely. "Miss Smith, yes, I've been trying to reach you for quite some time. Are you available to meet tonight? I know it's late, but this is rather urgent, and I've been instructed to handle this matter with absolute priority." Karen looked at Diane, who was making confused hand gestures. "Tonight? It's almost midnight. I understand, but your grandmother's instructions were very specific. She wanted you to know as soon as possible after her passing. It can be at your location within the hour if you're willing to meet." Something in his voice made Karen sit up straighter. "All right, I'll text you my address." They waited in tense silence, both of them still in their party clothes. Karen couldn't bring herself to take off the engagement dress yet. It felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. When the knock came exactly 1 hour later, both sisters jumped. Richard Sterling was a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. He carried a leather briefcase and looked at Karen with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Smith, thank you for seeing me at this unusual hour. Please come in. This is my sister, Diane." He sat on the couch and opened his briefcase with careful precision. "First, let me express my condolences for your loss. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. I barely knew her," Karen said honestly. "There was a family issue. My mother and grandmother didn't speak for decades. I'm aware of the estrangement. Your grandmother spoke of it with great regret. She wanted to reconcile, but felt she'd let too much time pass." He pulled out a thick folder. "However, that doesn't change what she wanted for you. Mrs. Smith, your grandmother Phyllis Smith has named you as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate." "What does that mean exactly?" Diane asked nervously. "Like her house, some savings." Richard Sterling looked at Karen with an expression that was hard to read. "Miss Smith, your grandmother built an empire from nothing. She started with one small motel decades ago and turned it into Smith Luxury Resorts. 23 hotels across the country, multiple real estate holdings, investment portfolios. The entire estate, which has been independently valued, is worth approximately $800 million. You now own all of it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Karen heard them, but they didn't make sense. They were sounds without meaning. Diane made a choking noise and then fell completely off the couch onto the floor with a thud that shook the coffee table. "I'm sorry," Karen said slowly. "Can you repeat that number?" $800 million. Your grandmother was one of the wealthiest women in the country. She was very private about it, but she built something remarkable, and she left all of it to you." Diane was still on the floor, staring at the ceiling and making strange breathing sounds that might have been hyperventilating. Karen looked down at the papers Richard was spreading across the coffee table. Deeds, bank statements, property listings. The numbers were so large they stopped having any real meaning. "I don't understand," Karen whispered. "Why me? She never even called me. We never spoke after I was a child." Richard's expression softened considerably. "She was too proud and too ashamed of the family rift. But she followed your life from afar. She knew about your education, your work, your engagement." He pulled out a worn journal from his briefcase. "She kept these. She wrote about you constantly. The last entry was written the week before she died." He opened the journal and turned it so Karen could read. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "My brilliant granddaughter is getting married tomorrow. I'll never meet him. I'll never know if he's worthy of her. But she has my empire now. May it give her the freedom I never had when I was her age, and trapped in a marriage that nearly destroyed me. May she never have to settle for less than she deserves. May she build something beautiful." Karen stared at the words, and for the first time since walking out of that ballroom, she felt tears burn behind her eyes. Not for Joe, not for the engagement, but for this woman she barely knew who had been watching from the shadows and hoping she'd be okay. After Richard left, with promises of a morning meeting, the sisters sat in stunned silence. Finally, Diane said, in a voice that didn't sound like her own, "Karen, oh my God, did that just happen?" "I think so." "You're a billionaire." "I think so." "Joe, Scott just humiliated a billionaire in front of 200 people because he wanted to keep his ex-girlfriend around, and then they both started laughing. It started as small giggles and built into something hysterical and uncontrollable. Diane was crying and laughing at the same time, rolling on the floor and gasping for air. He chose Natalie over $800 million. Karen laughed until her stomach hurt, until the engagement dress felt too tight, until the absurdity of the entire evening hit her all at once. She thought about Joe's face when he'd made his announcement, so confident, so sure he was being evolved and honest. "We can't tell anyone," Karen said when she finally caught her breath. "Not yet. I need to understand what I've inherited before the world knows. Are you going to tell Joe?" Karen thought about that for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Eventually, but not yet. Right now, he thinks he humiliated a woman who worked in marketing. Let him think that for a while longer. What are you going to do?" Karen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Joe was probably crying. Somewhere out there, guests were gossiping. But here, in this moment, Karen Smith stood at the edge of something vast and absolutely incredible. "I'm going to see what my grandmother built. I'm going to learn everything I can. And then I'm going to show Joe Scott and everyone else in that ballroom exactly who they underestimated tonight." As Karen finally took off the engagement dress and hung it in her closet, she realized something profound. Joe Scott thought he'd broken her tonight. What he didn't know was that he'd just freed her to step into a life she never knew was waiting. Chapter 2. The Empire's Daughter. Karen Smith walked through the glass doors of Smith Luxury, Resort's headquarters, and felt like she'd stepped into someone else's dream. The lobby soared 3 stories high with marble floors and a chandelier that looked like captured starlight. Employees in elegant uniforms moved with purpose, while soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers. Everything smelled expensive, like rare leather and imported flowers and old money wearing its wealth quietly. Diane had begged to come, but Karen insisted on facing this alone. She wore her best work suit, which suddenly felt cheap compared to the elegance surrounding her. Her hands were sweating despite the perfectly controlled temperature. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile that transformed into relief. "Ms. Smith, Mr. Bernard has been expecting you. Please follow me." They rode the elevator to the top floor in heavy silence. Karen watched the numbers climb and tried to control her breathing. She'd barely slept after Richard Sterling left. She'd spent the night reading documents and trying to comprehend numbers that seemed impossible. The elevator doors opened into an executive suite that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. The furniture was elegant without being pretentious. Photographs lined one wall, showing Smith luxury resorts evolving from a single small motel to an empire. In every photo, a black woman with kind eyes and an iron jaw stood proud. "That's your grandmother," a voice said from behind her. Karen turned to find a distinguished older man with warm brown skin and silver hair. He looked at her with suspiciously bright eyes. "You have her face, the same strength in your features. Mr. Bernard? Call me Bernard, please. Your grandmother never stood on ceremony, and neither do I." He took both her hands gently. "Welcome home, Karen. Phyllis talked about this moment constantly. She hoped you'd take your rightful place here." "I don't know anything about running hotels," Karen admitted. "I work in marketing." "I'm not sure I'm qualified," Bernard smiled warmly. "Your grandmother didn't start out knowing anything either. She was a housekeeper at a rundown motel when she was young. The owner tried to assault her one night. She fought him off, quit the job, and vowed she'd never be powerless again. She saved every penny for years. When that same motel went bankrupt, she bought it at auction with everything she'd saved. She rebuilt it from nothing. That was the beginning." Karen stared at the photographs with new understanding. "She built all of this from one motel, but from one motel and an unbreakable will. She faced discrimination that would have destroyed most people. Banks wouldn't lend to her. Suppliers wouldn't sell to her. Competitors tried to sabotage her. But she never stopped building. And she never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. Every hotel she built, she made sure the staff was treated with revolutionary dignity. She paid better than anyone in the industry. She promoted from within. She built hotels in communities other chains ignored. She did well by doing good, and employee loyalty was absolute." Tears burned in Karen's eyes. I wish I'd known her. I wish we hadn't lost all those years." She wished that too. But she understood. Your mother's anger was justified. Phyllis made mistakes as a mother while building this empire. She couldn't fix the past, but she hoped to give you a future where you never had to choose between success and relationships the way she did. Executives began filing into the conference room. Karen counted 11 people, all looking at her with curiosity and hope. Bernard introduced each one carefully. She tried desperately to remember names while her heart hammered. When everyone was seated, Bernard stood at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce you to Karen Smith, granddaughter of our founder Phyllis Smith and the new owner and CEO of Smith Luxury Resorts." The room erupted in genuine applause. Karen stood awkwardly, unsure what to say. Finally, she cleared her throat and spoke from the heart. "I'm not going to pretend I know what I'm doing yet. I have a lot to learn, but I promise you this, I will learn. I will work hard, and I will honor my grandmother's vision. She built something remarkable, and I won't let her down." More applause, and then the real work began. For 3 hours, executives walked her through everything with patient care. The hotels, the finances, the expansion plans, the challenges, the successes. Karen's head spun with information, but she forced herself to pay attention and ask questions. During a break, Bernard pulled her aside. "There's something you should know. A tech startup has been trying to get meetings with us for months. They want us to use their booking software. We've looked at it and it's not impressive, but they're persistent. What's the company called?" "Scott Technologies." The founder is a young man named Joe Scott. Karen's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Of course, Joe's failing company had been desperately trying to get meetings here. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "What do you think we should do?" What would your grandmother do? Karen thought seriously, pushing past personal feelings. She'd reject them based on merit. The software is outdated and overpriced. We can build something better ourselves. Then that's what we'll do. Should I mention you reviewed it personally? No. Keep it professional and separate from our history. The work should stand on its own. Bernard smiled with genuine respect. Your grandmother would be very proud. Karen spent the rest of the day touring headquarters and meeting staff. Everyone treated her with respect that felt unearned, but also warmth that seemed genuine. She learned that her grandmother had spoken about her constantly, had followed her life from afar with pride despite the estrangement, had hoped for reconciliation that came too late. By the time she left, exhausted and overwhelmed, Karen had made a decision. She wasn't going to announce this publicly yet. She wanted time to learn and become worthy of what she'd inherited. She'd continue her regular job while working evenings and weekends here. It would be brutal, but she needed to earn this throne. Her phone had been buzzing all day with messages from Joe. As she drove home, she finally listened to his voicemails. The first few were defensive, explaining he'd been honest and she was overreacting. The later ones shifted to panic. The last one made her laugh out loud. Karen, please. I'm sorry, okay? I handled it badly. Natalie doesn't mean anything. You're the one I want to marry. Please call me back. She deleted every message without responding. When she got home, Diane was pacing like a caged tiger. Well, how was it? Are you really a billionaire? Karen collapsed onto the couch and told her everything. When she finished, Diane stared at her with an unreadable expression. Finally, Diane said, You know what the craziest part is? Yesterday, you were planning a wedding to a man who publicly humiliated you. Today, you own a hotel empire. Life can change in a heartbeat. It doesn't feel real yet, Karen admitted quietly. I keep waiting to wake up. It's real. And Joe Scott is about to have the worst week of his life when he finds out what he lost. Karen's phone buzzed again. Another message from Joe about how much he loved her and how they needed to talk. She showed it to Diane, who snorted. What are you going to say? Karen typed something short and devastating. Joe, you made your choice in front of 200 people. I respect that choice. Now please respect mine. We're done. I wish you well with Natalie. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Within seconds, her phone started ringing. Karen turned it off completely and set it on the table. That's it? Diane asked. You're not going to tell him about the money? Not yet. Right now, he thinks he hurt a woman who worked a regular job. Let him think that. Let him sit with what he did without the complication of wealth. If he's truly sorry, it should be because he hurt me as a person, not because I'm rich. Diane grinned wickedly. You're playing chess while he's playing checkers. I'm not playing anything. I'm protecting myself. For years, I made myself small for people who didn't value me. Joe's announcement was horrible, but it was clarifying. It showed me I've been settling. That ends now. Over the following weeks, Karen lived 2 separate lives. During the day, she went to her regular job, where her boss was sympathetic but uncomfortable. Her co-workers whispered but stayed professionally distant. Joe kept calling until she blocked his number. Every evening and weekend, Karen went to Smith Luxury Resorts and learned everything she could. Bernard became her mentor. She studied financial reports. She toured every hotel. She met with department heads. She absorbed knowledge like she was dying of thirst. The executives were patient and increasingly impressed by her dedication. She wasn't treating this as inherited wealth to manage from a distance. She was learning every detail, asking intelligent questions, making connections. Bernard told her one evening that she reminded him of her grandmother in the early days, hungry to understand everything. One night, working late in what was now her office, Karen found a letter in a locked drawer. The key had been in Richard Sterling's envelope. The letter was addressed to her in shaky handwriting. My dearest Karen, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've inherited everything I built. I want you to understand why I left it to you. I failed your mother as a parent. I was building this empire while she needed a mother, and by the time I realized my mistake, the damage was done. But I watched you from afar, and I saw something that reminded me of myself at your age. Strength wrapped in gentleness, ambition tempered with compassion. Use this wealth wisely. Help others who feel powerless. Build something beautiful, and never let anyone make you feel small. You are extraordinary. I only wish I'd been brave enough to tell you myself. With all my love, Grandmother Phyllis. Karen read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her bag. She'd carry it always as a reminder of where she came from and what she was meant to do. Chapter 3. The Unveiling. The press conference was scheduled for late morning at the flagship Smith Luxury Resort Hotel. Karen stood in the executive suite, looking down at the gathering crowd of journalists and industry insiders. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but her hands were steady as she adjusted her new suit, tailored perfectly to fit her like armor. Bernard stood beside her, reviewing talking points. Remember, you don't have to answer every question. If someone gets too personal, redirect to the business. You're in control here. What if I freeze? What if I say something stupid? Then you'll be human. Your grandmother froze during her first press conference too. She told the reporters she needed a bathroom break, went and threw up, then came back and gave the speech of her life. Nerves mean you care. Karen took a deep breath and checked her reflection. The woman staring back looked powerful and completely different from the woman who'd walked out of that engagement party. I'm ready. The ballroom was packed with media outlets from across the country. News had leaked that Smith Luxury Resorts was making a major announcement, and speculation had been running wild. Nobody expected what was actually about to happen. Bernard took the podium first. Thank you all for coming. Today marks a historic moment for Smith Luxury Resorts. As many know, our beloved founder Phyllis Smith passed away several months ago. What you don't know is what she planned for the future of this company. It's my honor to introduce you to the new owner and CEO, Phyllis Smith's granddaughter, Karen Smith. The room erupted with surprised murmurs as Karen walked to the podium. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. She gripped the podium edges and spoke with a voice that didn't waver. Good morning. I know this announcement comes as a surprise. The truth is, it surprised me too. My grandmother and I were estranged for most of my life due to family complications I won't discuss publicly. When she passed away, I learned that despite our distance, she'd been following my life and hoping for reconciliation. She left me this incredible empire not because I'd proven myself worthy, but because she believed I could become worthy. That belief is a gift I intend to honor. She paused, making eye contact around the room. Smith Luxury Resorts was built on revolutionary principles. My grandmother believed that luxury should be accessible, that employees should be valued, and that businesses have a responsibility to improve communities. Under my leadership, we'll not only continue these principles, but expand them. Karen outlined her plans with growing confidence. Education grants for employees' children, profit-sharing programs, expansion into underserved neighborhoods, partnerships with community organizations, free housing programs for families in crisis. Every initiative designed to prove successful businesses could also be forces for good. When she finished her prepared remarks, questions came rapid fire. Mr. Smith, what qualifies you to run a company of this size with no hotel management experience? I don't claim to know everything. That's why I'm surrounding myself with the brilliant team my grandmother assembled and committing myself to learning every aspect of this business. Humility and willingness to learn are qualifications too. How do you respond to critics who say you inherited wealth rather than earned it? I agree with them. I didn't earn this through decades of labor the way my grandmother did. But I can earn it going forward by being a responsible steward of her legacy and using this platform to create opportunities for others. Then came the question she'd been dreading. A gossip columnist raised her hand with a predatory smile. Miss Smith, isn't it true that you were recently humiliated at your own engagement party when your fiancé publicly chose his ex-girlfriend over you? Some are saying this sudden emergence is just you trying to recover from embarrassment. The room went silent. Every camera focused on Karen's face. Bernard tensed, ready to intervene. But Karen simply smiled with that same serene expression and spoke with steel beneath silk. Yes, my engagement ended. And yes, it was public and painful. But I learned something valuable that night. I learned that I'd been making myself small for people who didn't truly value me. That ended immediately. So if you're asking whether being publicly humiliated motivated me to step into my power, the answer is absolutely yes. Sometimes the worst moments redirect us toward our best life. I'm grateful for the clarity, even though the delivery was brutal. The room erupted with follow-up questions, but Karen simply thanked everyone and walked off with Bernard. In the hallway, she finally let herself breathe. How did I do? You were magnificent. That answer about the engagement was perfect. Honest without being bitter. Strong without being defensive. The press conference made national news by evening. Headlines ranged from "Mystery Heiress Emerges" to "Lead Hotel Empire" to "From Public Humiliation to Public Power." Her face was everywhere. Social media exploded with commentary, most supportive and impressed by her grace. Joe Scott saw the news while eating dinner in his childhood kitchen, having moved back with his parents after his startup collapsed. The spoonful of soup froze halfway to his mouth as he watched Karen on television, poised and powerful, announcing herself as CEO of an empire worth hundreds of millions. The spoon dropped from his hand and clattered against the bowl. His mother walked in and gasped. "Oh my God, Joe, is that Karen?" Joe couldn't speak. He could only stare as the reporter recapped Karen's story, including a brief mention of the broken engagement. His father came in and watched in stunned silence, then turned slowly to Joe. "Son, tell me you didn't publicly humiliate a billionaire heiress for your ex-girlfriend." Joe's face went pale. "I didn't know. How could I know? She worked in marketing. She never said anything. Maybe because she didn't know either. The news said they were estranged, and she only found out after the engagement. Which means you humiliated her when she was just a regular person." "That's worse, Joe. That's so much worse." His phone started buzzing with messages from everyone. Friends sending shocked emojis. Elliot, his former business partner, sent a message that said simply, "You are the unluckiest man alive." Natalie called for the first time in weeks. Joe answered desperately, "Did you see the news?" "I saw it." "Joe, you chose me over a billionaire?" I didn't know she was a billionaire." "Nobody knew." Natalie was quiet, then said something that broke what was left of Joe's spirit. "Joe, I need to be honest. I never wanted us to get back together. I liked the attention, but I was never going to actually date you again. I'm seeing someone else. I have been for months." She hung up. Joe sat in his childhood kitchen and understood with devastating clarity that he'd destroyed his life for nothing. He'd humiliated Karen for a fantasy that never existed. His mother sat down with eyes full of disappointment. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. Try to apologize?" "And say what exactly?" "Sorry I humiliated you, but in my defense, I didn't realize you were secretly rich. That makes it better somehow?" His father shook his head. "You have a lot of growing up to do, son." Joe wanted to argue, but couldn't find words. His father was right. The money didn't matter. He treated Karen terribly regardless. The fortune just made his mistake more visible and impossible to escape. Karen didn't see any of Joe's attempts to contact her because she'd blocked him everywhere. She was too busy anyway. The press conference had opened floodgates of opportunity. Other business leaders wanted meetings. Charities requested partnerships. Politicians sought her endorsement. Diane moved into a beautiful apartment Karen bought for her, though Diane initially protested. "I don't want your money. You're not taking my money. You're accepting a gift from your sister who loves you. There's a difference. Besides, you've supported me emotionally through everything. Let me support you practically." At Smith Luxury Resorts, Karen dove deep into operations. She spent shifts working alongside housekeeping staff. She interviewed kitchen workers. She sat with front desk employees during busy check-ins. Every experience informed her decisions. The executives initially found her approach unusual, but they quickly came to respect it. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was learning from every angle, and her insights were valuable. One evening, Karen was reviewing reports when Bernard knocked. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insistent. Says his name is Joe Scott." Karen's pen stopped moving. She took a moment to steady herself. "What does he want?" "He says he needs to apologize in person. He's been waiting in the lobby for 3 hours. Part of her wanted to send him away, but another part recognized that avoiding him gave him power over her emotions. She needed to face him directly. "Send him up. Give me 5 minutes." Bernard nodded with understanding. Karen stood and looked at her reflection in the window. The city lights twinkled below. She was not the same woman who'd been humiliated. She needed to remember that. When Joe walked in, he looked terrible. Wrinkled suit, red eyes, lost weight. Shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. He stopped inside the door and stared at Karen like he'd never seen her before. "You look different," he said hoarsely. "I am different." "What do you want, Joe?" I saw the news. "I had no idea about any of this. Your grandmother, the hotels, the money. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know either. I found out the same night you humiliated me. My grandmother died months ago, and I'd been ignoring the lawyer's calls because I was too busy planning our wedding. After you made your announcement, I finally called him back. That's when I learned what she'd left me." Joe sank into a chair without being invited. "I'm so sorry, Karen. I was wrong. I was stupid and selfish, and I destroyed the best thing in my life." "Yes, you did. But not because I turned out to be wealthy. You destroyed it the moment you decided your ex-girlfriend deserved a place in our marriage. You destroyed it when you made that announcement publicly instead of having a private conversation. You destroyed it when you prioritized your ego over my dignity. I know. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. If I could take it back, I would." Karen sat on the edge of her desk and looked at him with eyes that held no anger. "Joe, I've spent weeks learning about my grandmother's life. She escaped abuse with nothing and built an empire through determination. She faced discrimination that would have destroyed most people, and she succeeded anyway. Do you know what the biggest lesson I learned?" Joe shook his head mutely. "That being underestimated is actually a gift. People who underestimate you reveal themselves while you quietly build something they can't touch. You underestimated me, Joe. You thought I would cry and beg and accept whatever scraps you decided to offer. Instead, I walked away and stepped into a life you can't even comprehend. So thank you for that. I don't want your gratitude. I want your forgiveness. I forgave you already. Not for you, but for me. Anger was too heavy to carry while building an empire. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean access. It means I've released the pain and moved forward without you." Joe stood desperately. "Please, give me another chance. I can change. I believe you can change. I hope you do. But that growth won't happen with me. I'm not interested in watching you learn basic decency at my expense. Find that journey on your own." "Is this because of the money?" Karen laughed without humor. "The money is irrelevant. I would have walked away whether I inherited an empire or nothing. You taught me that I'd been settling. That lesson was worth more than any inheritance. Now please leave. I have work to do." Security appeared at her door. Joe looked between her and the guards, realizing he had no power here. "Goodbye, Joe," she said softly. "I hope you learn from this. But you'll do that somewhere far away from me." He left without another word. Karen watched through her window as he crossed the parking lot to his old car, shoulders slumped. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger. Just quiet certainty that she'd made the right choice. Bernard came in after Joe left. "How do you feel?" "Free, completely free. For the first time since this nightmare started, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Chapter 4. The Ascent. The months following her announcement transformed Karen's life completely. Smith luxury resorts became the focus of intense media attention, and Karen found herself navigating business conferences, charity galas, and strategic partnerships. She discovered something surprising. She was good at it. The woman who'd once made herself small now commanded rooms full of powerful people with quiet confidence. She spoke at industry conferences about revolutionary labor practices. She appeared on business television discussing ethical wealth management. She sat on panels about women in leadership, always crediting her grandmother while carving out her own identity. Diane watched with pride and occasional concern. "You're working yourself to death. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'll sleep when I've proven I deserve this. Right now, people are waiting for me to fail. I won't give them that satisfaction. Grandmother left you this empire because she believed you were worthy. You don't need to prove anything." Karen softened. "You're right. But I need to prove it to myself. I need to know I can build something, not just inherit it." She poured herself into expansion plans that stunned the industry. While other luxury chains focused on serving wealthy clientele exclusively, Karen pioneered a dual approach. The hotels maintained luxury standards while simultaneously creating accessible programs for working families. Free conference rooms for local nonprofits, reduced-rate facilities for community celebrations, job training programs for underemployed residents. Critics called it financially reckless. Karen called it sustainable community investment. When financial reports showed increased loyalty and positive publicity translating to higher revenue, critics went quiet. She was proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. One initiative particularly captured national attention. Karen announced that every Smith luxury resort would dedicate an entire floor to providing free housing for domestic violence survivors for up to 1 year. The hotels would provide not just rooms, but supportive services, job training, childcare, and legal assistance. The backlash was immediate from some circles. Shareholders of other companies questioned whether she was running a charity or a business. But Karen stood firm during a television interview that went viral. "My grandmother escaped abuse with nothing. If these hotels had existed then, her life would have been easier. I'm not building this for profit. I'm building this because it's right. And if that makes me a bad businesswoman in some people's eyes, I can live with that judgment." Applications flooded in from women escaping terrible situations. Karen hired staff specifically to manage the program with dignity. She visited the floors regularly, meeting residents and hearing stories that reinforced her commitment. Meanwhile, Joe Scott's life continued its downward trajectory. His startup officially dissolved. Elliot launched a successful competing company and made clear Joe wasn't welcome. The call center job barely covered expenses. He was living in his parents' basement, watching Karen's success from afar. His mother tried to be supportive, but disappointment was evident. "You need to move forward, Joe. Stop watching her interviews. Stop torturing yourself. Focus on rebuilding your own life." "How am I supposed to rebuild when I destroyed everything?" "The same way anyone rebuilds. One small step at a time. Get therapy. Find meaningful work. Become someone you respect." But Joe couldn't let go. He was stuck in a loop of regret that corroded him from the inside. He drove past Smith Luxury Resorts headquarters sometimes, sitting in his car, staring up at the building. He knew it was unhealthy. He couldn't stop himself. One night, security approached his vehicle. The guard was professional but firm. "Sir, this is private property. If you don't have business here, I need to ask you to leave." "I'm just sitting. We've noticed your vehicle here multiple times. Ms. Smith has been made aware and has asked that we ensure all visitors have legitimate purposes. Do you have an appointment?" The humiliation of being removed by security was somehow worse than everything else. Joe drove home with tears blurring his vision and finally understood that he needed help. The next morning, he made an appointment with a therapist, not because he thought it would win Karen back. That ship had sailed and sunk, but because he was disgusted with who he'd become and terrified this broken version was permanent. Patricia Hayes was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach. During their first session, she asked him to explain why he was there. "I destroyed my life and I don't know how to fix it." "Tell me what you destroyed." Joe explained everything. The engagement party, Karen's humiliation, his stupid belief that keeping Natalie around proved he was evolved, the discovery of Karen's wealth and his complete devastation, the months of spiraling depression. When he finished, Patricia was quiet. Then she said something that changed his trajectory. "Joe, you're focused on the wrong problem. You're upset that you lost a wealthy woman. But the real issue is why you treated any woman that way, regardless of her financial status. Can you see the difference? I never cared about the money. I just miss Karen." Do you miss Karen? Or do you miss having someone who made you feel stable while you figured out your life? Because from what you've described, you kept your ex around as an ego boost while expecting Karen to be endlessly understanding. That's not love. That's using someone as an emotional safety net. The words hit like physical blows. Joe wanted to argue but couldn't. "I loved her." "I believe you felt something. But love requires valuing someone's dignity as much as your own. You humiliated Karen publicly because you prioritized your self-image as an honest man over her real feelings. That's not love. That's selfishness dressed in noble language." Joe sat with those words, and something cracked inside him. All the excuses suddenly sounded hollow. He hadn't been honest that night. He'd been cruel. "What do I do now?" "You do the hard work of understanding why you behaved that way. We'll explore your patterns, your needs for external validation, your fear of commitment disguised as honesty. We'll figure out why you kept Natalie around, and then you'll learn to be a better person, not to win Karen back, because that's not happening, but to be someone worthy of anyone's love, including your own." Joe committed to therapy with the desperation of a drowning man. He went twice weekly, doing painful work of examining his choices. He journaled. He read books about emotional intelligence. He stopped drinking. He started volunteering at a homeless shelter because he needed to do something meaningful. At the shelter, Joe met people who'd lost everything and were rebuilding from absolute zero. A veteran homeless for years, but now working toward his own apartment. A single mother who'd escaped abuse and was learning computer skills. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care trying to navigate adulthood alone. Their resilience humbled him. These people had faced challenges that made his problems look trivial, and they were moving forward with grace. Joe started actually caring about their stories instead of using their pain to feel better about himself. The shelter director, Ruth, noticed his commitment. "You're different from most volunteers. They come for a few weeks to feel good, then disappear. You keep showing up. I need this more than you need me. Being here reminds me that my problems are fixable if I do the work." "What problems are you fixing?" Joe told her an abbreviated version of his story. Ruth listened without judgment, then said something that stuck with him. "Sounds like you're learning the difference between the person you thought you were and the person your actions proved you to be. That's a hard gap to face. Most people never do it. You're braver than you think." Months passed. Joe's work at the shelter expanded from volunteering to a part-time paid position coordinating programs. It didn't pay much, but it filled him with purpose. He was helping people in tangible ways, and their success stories became his motivation. He stopped checking Karen's social media. He stopped driving past her buildings. He stopped fantasizing about apologies or reconciliation. He focused instead on becoming someone he could respect. Some days were harder than others, but slowly, painfully, he was building a foundation of genuine character. Meanwhile, Karen was dealing with her own challenges. Success brought attention she didn't always want. Eligible bachelors pursued her aggressively, often more interested in her fortune than her personality. Business leaders tried to manipulate her inexperience. Family members who'd ignored her for years suddenly emerged wanting relationships and financial support. She learned to navigate these minefields with strategic grace. She dated occasionally but never seriously. The men she met were either intimidated by her power or trying to dominate it. Neither option interested her. She'd rather be alone than compromise herself again. One evening at a charity gala, an older businessman cornered her and offered unsolicited advice about running her company. He spoke slowly and condescendingly. "You're very brave to try managing such a large enterprise with no experience. Perhaps you should consider hiring a strong male CEO to guide things while you focus on public relations." Karen smiled with ice in her voice. "That's thoughtful. I'll give it the same consideration you gave to not being a condescending dinosaur." The man sputtered while nearby guests tried not to laugh. Diane whispered, "I'm so proud of you right now I could cry." Karen was learning that power brought both opportunity and isolation. People treated her differently. Some were genuine, but most wanted something. She found herself missing the simplicity of her old life, even while recognizing she'd never go back. Bernard noticed her withdrawal and invited her for coffee. "You're pulling back from people. I recognize the pattern because your grandmother did the same thing. Can you blame me? Half the people I meet want my money, the other half want my influence." "That's not entirely true, but I understand the feeling. Your grandmother struggled with this too. She isolated herself in her later years, and she regretted it. Don't make her mistake. Stay open to genuine connection, even when it's risky." "How do I know who's genuine?" "You watch them over time. Genuine people show consistent character when they think nobody important is watching. They treat staff with respect. They keep their word about small things. They don't change their behavior based on your usefulness." Karen thought about that, then asked what had been bothering her. "Do you think I'm doing enough? With the money, the platform, the influence?" Bernard smiled gently. "Your grandmother asked me the same question many times. You're creating thousands of jobs. You're housing women escaping violence. You're building pathways out of poverty. You're treating employees with dignity. What more should you be doing?" "I don't know. Something that matters beyond business." "Everything you're doing matters beyond business. Don't diminish your impact just because it's tied to your company." That night, Karen sat in her grandmother's office and read more journals. One entry caught her attention. "People will tell you that being a woman in business means being twice as good for half the recognition. That's true. But they'll also tell you that being powerful means being hard, and that's where they're wrong. Real power is being strong enough to stay soft, strong enough to be generous when others are greedy, strong enough to build others up while building yourself. That's the legacy I want, not just hotels, but hope." Karen closed the journal with tears in her eyes. She was building more than an empire. She was building her grandmother's dream of a world where power served purpose. Chapter 5. The Collision of Worlds. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Karen stood on the rooftop terrace of her newest hotel, overseeing final preparations for the grand opening. This location was special because it wasn't in a wealthy neighborhood. She'd deliberately chosen an area that had been economically depressed for decades, bringing jobs and investment where they were desperately needed. The community had been skeptical at first. Luxury hotels usually meant gentrification and displacement. Karen addressed those concerns by hiring locally, partnering with existing businesses, and creating a community advisory board. The approach was working. Local leaders who'd initially opposed the project were now celebrating it. Bernard joined her on the terrace with coffee. "You look tired. When's the last time you took a day off?" "I'll take a day off when I've earned it. You inherited almost $1 billion. I think you've earned it." Karen laughed, despite her exhaustion. You know what I mean. I want to build something that matters. You're already doing that. This hotel alone will employ 300 people from this neighborhood. The domestic violence floor is full with women rebuilding their lives. You're partnering with local schools for hospitality training programs. You're changing lives. Give yourself credit. She sipped her coffee and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Joe was living his smaller life, and she felt nothing about that fact. Not satisfaction in his downfall, not lingering anger, just indifference. He'd become irrelevant to her story. I want to start a foundation, she said suddenly, separate from the hotels, something focused specifically on helping women escape bad situations. Housing is just the start. They need legal support, job training, childcare, therapy, financial literacy. I want to create comprehensive programs. Bernard smiled. Your grandmother would love that idea. She talked about doing something similar but never got there. You're taking her vision further. Will you help me? I'll help you find people who do. And Karen, take the day off tomorrow. Not because you've earned it, but because even empire builders need rest. She agreed reluctantly. The next morning, she slept until noon for the first time in months, then took Diane to lunch at a small neighborhood restaurant. They laughed over salads and reminisced about growing up poor with big dreams. Remember when we used to fantasize about being rich? Diane said. We thought it meant fancy cars and designer clothes. Reality is more complicated. The money solves some problems, but creates others. I worry constantly about making the right decisions. Every choice affects thousands of people. That weight is heavier than I expected. After lunch, they walked through the neighborhood where Karen's new hotel stood. Local residents recognized her and stopped to chat, thanking her for bringing jobs. An older woman hugged her with tears. My grandson got hired as a line cook at your hotel. First real job he's had. You saved his life. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. As they walked, they passed a community center with a poster advertising volunteer opportunities. Karen paused, reading various programs. One caught her eye, life skills workshops for people rebuilding after homelessness. This is the kind of partnership I want, Karen told Diane. Not just hotels, but integration with community resources. She walked inside to speak with administrators and was directed to the program coordinator. He's in a meeting right now, but should be done shortly. You're welcome to wait. Karen sat in the modest lobby, surrounded by flyers and community notices. This place felt real in a way luxury hotels didn't. No marble or chandeliers. Just people genuinely trying to help with limited resources and unlimited commitment. The meeting room door opened and people filed out. When the last person left, Karen stood to introduce herself and froze completely. The program coordinator was Joe Scott. He looked as shocked as she felt. They stared at each other while time seemed to stop. He looked different. Thinner but healthy. His clothes were simple but clean. His eyes were clear instead of desperate. He looked like someone who'd been broken and rebuilt with more care. Karen, he said quietly, I didn't know you were coming here. I didn't know you worked here. I was exploring the neighborhood around my new hotel, the Smith Luxury Resort, about 6 blocks from here. We've been partnering with them for job training referrals. They stood in awkward silence until Diane appeared, saw Joe, and immediately tensed. We should go. It's fine, Karen said, surprising herself. Joe, can we talk for a minute? He looked uncertain but nodded. They sat in the lobby while Diane waited outside, clearly unhappy. Karen studied Joe's face, looking for signs of the man who'd humiliated her. She found someone different. You work here? She asked. I've been volunteering for over a year. They hired me 6 months ago to coordinate programs. It doesn't pay much, but it's meaningful. I help people who are rebuilding their lives after hitting bottom. Turns out I understand that process pretty well. Are you in therapy? The question surprised him. Yes, twice a week for the past year. How did you know? Because you look different. Not just physically. You carry yourself differently. Less arrogance, more substance. Joe nodded slowly. Therapy helped me understand why I treated you the way I did. Helped me see that I kept Natalie around because I was terrified of commitment and needed an exit strategy. That I used your patience as a safety net while feeding my ego. I was selfish and cruel, and I dressed it up in language about honesty to avoid responsibility." Karen listened without expression. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked. Because you deserve to hear it. Not because I expect anything. I know we're done. But you deserve to know that I've spent every day since that engagement party trying to become someone worthy of basic decency. And have you succeeded?" "Some days yes, some days no. It's a process. But I'm better than I was, and I'm committed to continuing to improve. Not for you, for myself." Karen stood and Joe stood with her. She looked at him with eyes that held no anger, but no forgiveness either. "I'm glad you're getting help. I'm glad you're doing meaningful work. But I need you to understand something clearly. We will never reconcile. We will never be friends. If we cross paths professionally, we'll be cordial. But that's it. Can you accept that?" "Yes, completely. I'm not here trying to win you back. I'm here trying to be someone who wouldn't have hurt you in the first place." She nodded, then walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back. "Joe, the work you're doing here matters. Don't let our history make you second-guess that. Keep doing it well." Then she was gone, and Joe sat back down in the empty lobby, shaking. Seeing her had been harder than any therapy session. But it had also confirmed something important. He wasn't doing this transformation for her. He was doing it for himself. Outside, Diane grabbed Karen's arm. "Are you okay?" "Why did you talk to him?" "I needed to see who he'd become. Needed to know if the transformation was real or performed. And I think it's real. But it doesn't matter. He's become someone better, which is good for the world, but that person is still not welcome in my life." They walked back toward Karen's car in silence. Finally, Diane said, "You're being very generous in your assessment. I'm being realistic. Holding on to anger would only hurt me. Acknowledging his growth costs me nothing. But acknowledgement isn't reconciliation." The encounter stayed with Karen for days. She found herself thinking about Joe's transformation more than she wanted to admit. Not because she had feelings for him, those had died completely, but because his journey from arrogant to humble fascinated her. She researched the community center and learned it had excellent reputation. Joe's program specifically had remarkable success rates. Whatever he was doing it well. Against her better judgment, Karen asked Ruth, the shelter director, to meet for coffee. Ruth agreed enthusiastically. Over coffee, they discussed program integration. Then Karen asked carefully, "Tell me about Joe Scott." Ruth smiled. "Joe's been volunteering for about 18 months. Started coming in looking lost and broken. Honestly thought he'd last a week, but he kept showing up. Did grunt work without complaining. Listened to residents with genuine compassion. After 6 months, I offered him a paid position because he'd essentially been doing the work anyway. Is he good at it? He's excellent. Participants trust him because he's honest about having been at rock bottom. He doesn't pretend to have answers. He just shows up consistently and treats everyone with respect. Does he talk about his past?" Ruth studied Karen carefully. "He talks about having hurt someone badly due to selfishness. Says he's trying to become someone who wouldn't make those mistakes. But he never mentions specifics." "Why are you asking?" "Because I'm the someone he hurt. We were engaged. He humiliated me publicly by announcing his ex would remain in our lives. I walked out and we ended." Ruth's eyes widened. "And then you inherited your grandmother's empire. I remember reading about your story. I just didn't make the connection." "I'm not trying to monitor his progress. I just needed to know if his transformation was genuine. It's genuine. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I can spot fake remorse. Joe's is real. Whether that earns him forgiveness is another question, but the work itself is authentic. It doesn't earn forgiveness, but I appreciate knowing." They finished their coffee discussing logistics. When they parted, Ruth said something that stayed with Karen. "You know what I admire about both of you? You responded to crisis by building. You built an empire and used it to help others. He built new character and used it to help others. Different scales, same instinct." Karen drove home thinking about parallel journeys. Joe had lost everything and rebuilt with humility. She'd gained everything and was using it with responsibility. They were both different people, but different didn't mean compatible. Different just meant they'd both grown, separately, into better versions of themselves. That night, Diane asked what she'd learned. Karen explained, then added, "I think he's genuinely changed. But it doesn't change anything between us. He can be a good person now without being good for me. I'm relieved to hear you say that. I'm not soft. I'm realistic. Holding on to anger would poison me. But letting him back in would be stupid. I can acknowledge his growth while maintaining boundaries." Several weeks passed. Karen was consumed with foundation planning. Joe was across the city running programs. Their paths didn't cross again, but Karen found herself thinking about that encounter more than expected. One evening, Bernard brought her a proposal from the community center requesting funding for expansion. Joe's signature was on the documents. Karen read through the proposal carefully. It was well researched and would genuinely benefit the community. "What do you think?" Bernard asked. "I think it's good work regardless of who wrote it. Fund it at requested level. Tell them we are approving based on merit. Should I mention you reviewed it personally?" "No. Keep it professional. The work should stand on its own." Bernard smiled. "Your grandmother would approve." Karen signed the documents and tried not to think about funding programs run by the man who'd once broken her heart. But funding good work wasn't about him. It was about the people those programs served. Chapter 6. The Foundations We Build. The Karen Smith Foundation launched on a rainy Thursday, with modest celebration but profound purpose. Karen stood in the office space she'd rented, looking at her assembled team of social workers, legal advocates, therapists, and job training specialists, all believers in the mission of helping women rebuild their lives with dignity. "We're not just handing out money," Karen explained during their first staff meeting. "We're creating pathways. Every woman gets personalized support, addressing her specific barriers. Housing is baseline. From there, we assess needs. Legal help escaping dangerous partners, therapy for trauma, job skills for independence, childcare so they can work, financial literacy to build futures. We remove barriers instead of treating symptoms." Within the first month, 40 women enrolled. Karen visited regularly, meeting participants and hearing stories that reinforced her commitment. A woman, beaten for 15 years, who finally escaped with 3 children. A young mother who'd been trafficked, learning she had value. An elderly woman whose husband controlled every penny and left her destitute. Their resilience astonished Karen. These women survived horrors and were fighting back to stability with fierce determination. She made sure they knew they weren't charity cases. They were warriors rebuilding kingdoms, and the foundation was providing tools, not pity. One afternoon, Karen met with Teresa, a woman in her 30s who'd escaped with 2 young daughters. Teresa had been an accountant before her husband destroyed her confidence and isolated her completely. "I never thought I'd get out," Teresa said quietly. "When I saw information about your foundation, I thought it was too good to be true. Women like you are exactly who this exists for. You're not broken. You were broken by someone else, and now you're healing. That takes more strength than people understand." Teresa studied Karen carefully. "The media says you started this foundation after your own public humiliation. Is that true?" Karen paused, then chose honesty. "Yes. My fiancé humiliated me at our engagement party by announcing his ex would remain in our lives. I walked out. Shortly after, I inherited wealth I didn't know existed. I could have used it just for myself. But I kept thinking about powerlessness and how much worse it would be without resources. So I built this. You turned your pain into purpose. I'm trying to. Your success matters, Teresa. You prove that healing is possible when we support each other properly." Her phone buzzed with a message from Bernard. The community center where Joe worked had submitted their mid-year report. Success rates exceeded projections. Bernard attached a note. "Joe Scott is doing excellent work with our investment. Whatever happened personally, professionally, he's delivering results that change lives." Karen read the report carefully. Joe's program was highlighted for innovative approaches addressing shame while building self-worth. Participants praised his genuine care and refusal to judge. He'd created space where people could be honest about failures without penalty. She found herself unexpectedly proud, then immediately questioned that feeling. His accomplishments weren't hers, yet seeing him use pain to help others felt meaningful. Over following months, Karen's foundation expanded rapidly. They added programs for youth experiencing family rejection, resources for elderly women facing financial abuse, partnerships with legal aid organizations. Every program designed with dignity at its core. Karen was invited to speak at conferences. She testified before legislative committees. She wrote articles about breaking cycles of abuse. Her platform was enormous, and she used it to amplify voices usually ignored. A national conference on trauma-informed programming invited both her and Ruth as keynote speakers. The organizers mentioned featuring a panel, including Joe, discussing shame reduction approaches. Karen's first instinct was declining to avoid him. But hundreds would benefit from his insights, and declining felt petty. She accepted. The conference was overwhelming. Thousands gathered to share approaches. Karen's keynote focused on using privilege to create systemic change, rather than just charity. She received a standing ovation, and dozens approached wanting to replicate her model. On the second day, walking between sessions, Karen heard Joe's voice from a packed conference room. Despite intentions to keep walking, she paused and listened. "The hardest part of transformation isn't changing behavior," Joe said. "It's forgiving yourself enough to believe you deserve better. Most people who've hurt others carry shame so heavy it prevents growth. They either deny what they did, making change impossible, or drown in guilt, which also makes change impossible. The work is finding middle space where you acknowledge harm without letting it define you permanently." Someone asked how he'd learned that distinction. Joe was quiet before answering. "I hurt someone badly through selfishness. I spent months drowning in shame, which helped nobody. Then my therapist asked, 'Are you upset because you hurt her, or because facing what you did hurts your self-image?' I realized it was the second one. That realization was devastating and liberating. It let me focus on behavior instead of identity." Karen felt something shift as she listened. His transformation wasn't performed for her benefit. It was deep, structural work, and it made him someone who could help others navigate similar journeys. She slipped away before the session ended. That evening at a reception, Ruth spotted her and waved enthusiastically. They chatted about programs until Joe appeared with drinks. He saw Karen and froze mid-step. Ruth said cheerfully, "You two know each other, right?" "We've met," Karen said neutrally. Joe set down drinks carefully. "I didn't know you'd be here. I've been avoiding sessions you were in. Don't want to make things uncomfortable. The conference is huge. We can coexist for a few days without drama." "I appreciate that. I heard part of your keynote. You were incredible. The work you're doing is genuinely transformative." "Thank you. I heard part of your panel. Your approach to shame reduction is valuable." They spoke with careful professionalism. Ruth excused herself, clearly wanting to give them space. Alone together, they stood in uncomfortable silence until Joe spoke. "Can I say something? I'm proud of you. Watching you build this foundation is inspiring. You could have just lived comfortably, but you chose meaning." Karen studied his face for manipulation. She found only genuine admiration. "Thank you. Your programs help people too. Keep doing them." "I will." "And Karen, I'm sorry for everything. For humiliating you, for being selfish and immature, for treating you like an option. You deserved better." "I know I did. That's why I left." "I'm glad you left. Look at what you built in the space I would have occupied. I would have held you back." His absolute sincerity without expectation made Karen soften slightly. "You were mediocre then. You're not anymore. Be proud of that without wallowing in what you destroyed. Those are separate things." "Are they? Sometimes it feels like I'm only doing this to atone for what I did." "Then you're doing it for wrong reasons. Do it because helping people matters, not because you're balancing some cosmic shame scale." Your participants deserve better than being your penance project. Joe flinched at the harsh accuracy. You're right. Thank you for that honesty. You're welcome. Now I need to network with people who can expand our programs. She walked away feeling strangely lighter. Seeing Joe didn't hurt as expected. It felt like encountering someone from a past life, someone who'd once mattered but no longer had power over her emotions. That realization felt like freedom. The conference ended with renewed energy and dozens of new partnerships. Karen flew home with notebooks full of ideas and heart full of purpose. She'd built something meaningful from pain, and that mattered more than lingering feelings about the man who'd caused it. Back home, she dove into expansion plans. The foundation would double capacity, new programs, more communities served. Every woman who needed help would get it with dignity. One evening, Diane found her working late and brought tea. Did seeing Joe at the conference mess with your head? Karen thought honestly. A little, not because I have feelings for him, but seeing proof of genuine transformation made me question whether holding boundaries against changed people is protective or just fearful. It's protective and smart. Just because he's better doesn't mean he's good for you. I know that intellectually. My heart is just catching up. Take your time. Meanwhile, keep building. Those things are real and permanent. Joe's transformation might be real, but it's separate from you. They laughed together, and Karen felt the last tension drift away. He was doing his work. She was doing hers. Maybe someday those paths would intersect again. Maybe not. Either way, Karen was building something beautiful, regardless of whether Joe was part of that picture. Chapter 7. The Year of Becoming. Seasons changed, and the foundation flourished beyond ambitious hopes. By autumn, they'd helped over 300 women rebuild lives from ashes. The hotels thrived too. Karen's approach of treating employees like family while maintaining luxury standards created loyalty competitors couldn't replicate. Staff turnover was almost non-existent. Service quality was legendary. But success came with exhaustion. Karen ran herself into the ground, managing hotels, expanding the foundation, speaking at conferences. Diane watched with increasing concern as her sister operated on 4 hours of sleep and endless coffee. You're going to collapse, Diane warned. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. I'm fine. I have too much to do to be tired. You're not superhuman. You need rest. The decision was made for her when she collapsed during a board meeting. One moment presenting quarterly financials, the next waking in a hospital bed with Diane and Bernard hovering anxiously. What happened? You passed out mid-sentence, Bernard said gently. Doctors say you're severely exhausted and dehydrated. Your body finally forced you to rest. I've cleared your calendar completely. Diane is taking you to the beach house. You're sleeping and doing nothing else. Diane drove her to the beach house their grandmother had owned. The sound of waves and smell of salt air immediately eased tension Karen didn't know she carried. For 3 days, she slept almost constantly. When she finally felt human, she sat on the deck watching the ocean and let herself be still. Diane brought tea and sat beside her. How do you feel? Stupid for pushing this hard. Scared about how much needs doing. The work will always be there. You won't if you keep destroying yourself. Grandmother built an empire, but died estranged from family because she couldn't balance work and relationships. Don't repeat her mistakes. I don't have relationships to balance. I have work and family. Maybe that's the problem. You've closed yourself off from everything except building. When's the last time you did something just for joy? Karen couldn't remember. Every moment was scheduled and purposeful. I don't have time for frivolous things. Joy isn't frivolous. It's necessary. You're helping hundreds rebuild lives, but you're not living yours. Over the next days, Karen forced herself to rest without guilt. She walked on the beach, read novels instead of reports, cooked slowly. She remembered what it felt like to exist without constantly producing. On the 4th day, she called Bernard to check on things and was relieved everything ran smoothly. The empire doesn't collapse when you rest. That's what having good people means. Her phone buzzed with an email from Ruth. Subject line, exciting expansion opportunity. Karen read about a chance to triple programming reach through partnership with a national organization. The proposal was thorough. Joe's name was all over it as lead architect. She read every detail, impressed despite herself. This wasn't expansion for ego. It was strategic, thoughtful, designed to maximize impact while maintaining quality. Joe had learned the difference between scaling and diluting. Karen approved the funding with a note to Ruth. Excellent proposal. Funded at requested level with 3-year commitment for stability. Joe's work continues to impress. That night, unable to sleep, Karen walked the beach under a full moon. She thought about the woman she'd been at that engagement party. Young, uncertain, willing to compromise herself. She thought about who she'd become. Powerful, strategic, using resources to change lives. But Diane's words haunted her. Was she living or just building? Was she healing or avoiding? She'd poured herself into work to avoid dealing with fear that she might never find love again. Her phone rang. Bernard's name appeared. Everything okay? Everything's fine. But your story just went viral again. There's a long article about your foundation's impact. They interviewed dozens of women you've helped. It's beautiful. She pulled up the article and read by moonlight. The journalist captured stories with sensitivity. Women talked about escaping violence and finding not just housing, but hope. One quote struck her. A woman named Angela said, "Miss Smith could have used her money to make herself comfortable and forgotten people like us. Instead, she remembered what powerlessness feels like and built something to fight it. She's not our savior. She's someone who gave us tools to save ourselves." Karen sat on the beach and cried. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming sense of purpose. This was why she'd survived that terrible night. This was what her pain had been transformed into. When she returned to the city, Karen was different. Still driven, but more balanced. She delegated more, said no to opportunities not aligned with core mission, protected her energy like the precious resource it was. She hired a chief operating officer to manage daily operations while she focused on vision and strategy. At one hotel, Karen encountered a new employee, a young woman working as housekeeper. They chatted briefly and the woman suddenly started crying. "6 months ago, I was living in your domestic violence floor with my daughter. We had nothing. Your foundation helped me get job training, childcare, legal help. Now I have this job, my own apartment, custody of my daughter and a future. You saved my life." Karen hugged her while they both cried. "You saved your own life. We just gave you tools. Your courage made the difference." Moments like that sustained her through hard days. Every woman who found stability proved the work mattered. One evening, leaving the office late, she saw Joe across the street with a group from the community center, all laughing together. He looked relaxed and genuine, comfortable in his own skin. She felt no pain, just distant recognition that he'd also transformed. He noticed her and waved with a smile, holding no longing or regret. Just friendly acknowledgement. Karen waved back, then went to her car feeling lighter than she'd felt in months. Diane was waiting at home with takeout. "Did something good happen? You look peaceful." "I saw Joe today. Didn't hurt at all. Felt nothing except mild pleasantness. That's huge progress. Maybe you're finally moving past everything. Maybe, or maybe I'm so focused on building my own life that his presence doesn't register as significant anymore. Either way, it feels like freedom." They ate dinner and talked about everything except work. Diane was dating someone new and cautiously optimistic. Their mother had stopped asking when Karen would find another man and started celebrating her success instead. Karen fell asleep that night without thinking about Joe, or the engagement party, or any pain that had once consumed her. She dreamed instead of the foundation's expansion, of more women finding stability, of legacy and purpose and transformation. When she woke, she felt ready to build more beauty from the ashes of her past. Chapter 8. The Crossing Point. Spring arrived again, marking 2 full years since the engagement party disaster. Karen stood in the ballroom of her flagship hotel, The same space where Joe had humiliated her, now transformed for the Foundation's anniversary gala. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd reclaimed the space where she'd been broken and filled it with celebration of healing. The gala was spectacular. 500 guests, including business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and most importantly, women who'd been helped by the Foundation's programs. Karen insisted they be treated as honored guests, not charity cases. They wore beautiful dresses provided by the Foundation, sat at prominent tables, and were introduced with dignity and respect. Karen's speech focused on the women whose courage had inspired the Foundation's work. She told stories of resilience and rebuilding. She acknowledged that money helped, but character healed. She thanked her team, her grandmother's memory, and most of all, the women who'd trusted the Foundation with their journeys. The room rose in standing ovation that brought tears to her eyes. This was what power should be used for. Not accumulation or domination, but transformation and elevation. After the formal program, guests mingled and networked. Karen was surrounded by people wanting to discuss partnerships. She was gracious but exhausted, ready for the evening to end. Then she saw Joe enter with Ruth and community center staff. Her heart skipped briefly before settling back. He was here professionally because their organizations were partners. She was adult enough to handle this. Ruth waved enthusiastically and pulled Karen into a hug. This event is magnificent. Everything centers dignity and empowerment. You've created something truly special. Thank you. The community center partnerships have been crucial to our success. Your programs complement ours perfectly. Joe stood slightly back, letting Ruth take the lead. When Karen made eye contact with him, he nodded with quiet respect. Congratulations on everything you've built. The impact is measurable and meaningful. Thank you. Your programs are part of that impact. They spoke with professional courtesy, two people who'd learned to coexist without drama. Bernard appeared with someone he wanted Karen to meet, giving her an excuse to move on. The evening progressed with music and celebration. Karen danced with Diane, with Bernard, with Foundation staff. She laughed genuinely for the first time in weeks. During a quiet moment at the bar, Joe appeared beside her ordering water. They stood in slightly awkward silence until he spoke. Can I say something without overstepping? Depends on what you want to say. Watching you tonight, seeing what you've built, and how you've transformed pain into purpose, I'm genuinely in awe. The women here look at you like you hung the moon. That's real power. Karen studied his face, searching for hidden agendas. She found only sincerity.
Thank you.
That means something. I also want to acknowledge something. I've been working in therapy on taking accountability without centering myself in others' stories. So I'm not trying to insert myself into your success. You built this despite me, not because of me. I just wanted to recognize that from a distance. Something about his careful words made Karen soften slightly. I appreciate that distinction. And Joe, I've watched your work too. The expansion proposal was excellent. The success rates are remarkable. You're doing meaningful work. Be proud of that. I am proud. But doing good work now doesn't erase causing harm before. Those are separate ledgers. They are. But transformation is real. You're not the same person who stood up at our engagement party. I'm not the same woman who walked out. We've both become different people. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd been this version of myself back then? Karen considered that honestly. Sometimes. But I think we needed to break apart so we could both grow into who we were meant to be. If you'd been perfect then, I might never have discovered my own power. Maybe the timing was wrong, because we both needed to become better separately. Joe nodded slowly. That's a generous way to frame a painful experience. It's not generous. It's realistic. I spent months being angry, then months being indifferent, and now I'm just grateful for the trajectory, even though the catalyst was brutal. Ruth appeared slightly tipsy. There you two are. I've been watching you having what looks like a very serious conversation. Everything okay? Everything's fine, Karen assured her. Just discussing professional partnerships. Good. Because I have a proposal. The National Conference wants a panel next year on transformation and accountability in leadership. They want Karen discussing building from pain and Joe discussing rebuilding after causing harm. The contrast would be powerful. Karen and Joe exchanged glances. That would be complex, Karen said carefully, which is exactly why it would be valuable. Think about it and let me know. After Ruth wandered off, Joe turned to Karen. Would you be comfortable with something like that? I don't know. It would require being vulnerable about our history publicly, only if you wanted to. We could keep it generic instead of personal. Let me think about it. Right now, I need to get back to my guests. She moved through the crowd, but Joe's presence stayed with her. Not romantically, but contemplatively. They'd both grown so much. They existed in parallel orbits now, occasionally intersecting but never colliding. That felt like maturity. At the end of the evening, after the last guest left, Karen stood alone in the ballroom. Diane found her there, lost in thought. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about how far I've come. 2 years ago, I was humiliated in this exact room. Tonight, I celebrated helping hundreds of women find their power in this same space. You reclaimed the space. That's powerful. I reclaimed more than the space. I reclaimed myself. The woman who walked out was scared and uncertain. The woman standing here now is neither. What about Joe? I saw you two talking. Any lingering feelings? Karen thought honestly. No romantic feelings, but I have complicated respect for his transformation. He's genuinely become someone better. That doesn't mean I want him back, but it means I can acknowledge his growth without bitterness. That's very evolved of you. Or maybe I'm just so secure in my own life that his presence doesn't threaten me anymore. They left the hotel together, and Karen felt profound completion. She'd built something beautiful from ashes. She'd proven pain could be transformed into purpose. She'd become the woman her grandmother hoped she'd be. But as she fell asleep that night, a small voice whispered a question she wasn't ready to examine. If Joe had genuinely become someone worthy, and if she'd genuinely healed, was there ever a possibility of starting fresh? Not resuming what they'd had, but building something entirely new from who they'd both become. She pushed the thought away as exhaustion claimed her. Some questions were too complicated to answer in the quiet dark. For now, she was content with parallel orbits. The future could wait until tomorrow. Chapter 9. The Reckoning of Truth. The invitation arrived for her cousin's wedding. Karen immediately RSVP'd yes, looking forward to celebrating family joy. She didn't think about Joe until she arrived at the venue and saw him sitting in the third row, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was clearly borrowed. Her heart stuttered before settling back into normal rhythm. Their families had connections through business circles. Of course he might be invited. They made eye contact across the ceremony space. He nodded with quiet respect, no trace of expectation or hope in his expression. She nodded back, then deliberately focused on the ceremony, determined not to let his presence distract from her cousin's happiness. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Karen cried happy tears, watching two people commit to building life together, making promises they clearly intended to keep. She felt no bitterness about her own failed engagement, just genuine joy that love still existed in the world, that some people got it right the first time, that not all relationships ended in ballroom humiliations and shattered dreams. At the reception, she deliberately chose a table far from where Joe sat. But weddings have a way of forcing social interaction, mixing people who might prefer to stay separated, and eventually they ended up at the bar, at the same time ordering drinks. "Congratulations to your cousin," Joe said, his voice careful and neutral. "Beautiful ceremony. Thank you. Are you here with someone?" "Just me," connected to the groom's family through business partnerships at the community center. "You? Flying solo. Too busy building empires to date." The words came out more bitter than she intended, revealing more vulnerability than she wanted to show. He smiled at her self-deprecating humor with genuine warmth rather than pity. Same, well, not empires, obviously. But the work at the center doesn't leave much time for personal life. Not that I'm looking. I'm still working on being someone who deserves a personal life. They fell into surprisingly easy conversation about surface-level topics that felt safe. The weather, the beautiful venue, her cousin's obvious happiness. Nothing deep or dangerous. When music started and couples moved to the dance floor in pairs that looked effortlessly connected, they both watched with expressions that might have been wistful, or might have been regretful, or might have been both. "Do you miss it?" Karen asked before she could stop herself. "Being part of a couple?" "Sometimes," Joe admitted, his honesty catching her off guard. "But I'm still working on being someone who could be a good partner. Until that work is done, dating anyone would be unfair to them. I won't inflict my unfinished business on someone else. I did that once and destroyed something precious." The bride appeared suddenly, slightly drunk and delighted with her own happiness, and grabbed both their hands with tipsy enthusiasm. "You two should dance." "Come on, don't be wallflowers at my wedding." Before either could protest or make excuses or escape, she'd pulled them onto the dance floor with surprising strength for someone in heels and a massive dress. The song was slow and romantic, something about second chances and finding your way back home. And suddenly, Karen and Joe were dancing together for the first time in over 2 years. His hand on her waist felt familiar and foreign simultaneously, like revisiting a house you used to live in and finding everything both exactly the same and completely different. "Is this weird?" Joe asked quietly, his breath warm near her ear. "Very weird, but also somehow okay." Karen heard the question in her own voice and wondered when she'd become so uncertain about her own feelings. They swayed in silence for a moment, both hyper-aware of every point of contact, every breath, every heartbeat. Then Joe said something that surprised her. "You look happy. Not right now necessarily, but in general. I see your interviews and read about the foundation. You look like someone who found exactly what she was meant to do." "I am happy," Karen said, and realized as she said it that it was true. "I built something meaningful from the worst night of my life. That feels powerful in a way I can't quite explain. You turned pain into purpose. That's what healing looks like." When the song ended, they separated quickly, almost awkwardly, the spell broken by returning reality. But something had shifted between them. Not romantic interest exactly, but recognition that their history was more complex than victim and perpetrator, more nuanced than villain and hero. They'd both been flawed people who'd hurt each other in different ways. And they'd both done the hard work of becoming better. Over the following months, they kept running into each other with increasing frequency. At conferences where they were both speakers, at charity events where their organizations collaborated, at community gatherings where their work naturally intersected. Each interaction was professional and cordial, but each one also chipped away at the walls Karen had carefully built around her heart. Diane noticed during their weekly dinner her sister's observational skills as sharp as ever. "You're thinking about him again. I can tell by that look on your face." "I'm not thinking about him romantically," Karen protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm just processing that people can genuinely change. That transformation is real and possible. They can change without you taking them back. Growth doesn't obligate forgiveness or reconciliation or anything else. But what if someone transforms themselves completely? What if they do years of genuine work with no guarantee of reward? At what point does transformation become undeniable? At what point do they deserve a chance to prove who they've become? Be honest with yourself. Are you actually considering this? After everything he did, Karen set down her fork and met her sister's eyes with complete honesty. "Part of me thinks I'm crazy to even entertain the thought. He humiliated me publicly in front of everyone we knew. He chose his ex-girlfriend over me at our engagement party. He destroyed what we had in the most public, painful way possible. But another part of me sees how much he's genuinely changed over 3 years of consistent effort, and wonders if holding on to the past prevents something potentially good in the present. I don't know what the right answer is. If he's genuinely changed, he'll still be genuinely changed 6 months from now, or a year from now. Take your time deciding. Don't rush into anything just because you're lonely or because he's done some good work. You deserve someone who was worthy from the start, not someone who had to destroy you to figure out how to be a decent human being. You're right. I know you're right. Then the foundation faced its biggest crisis since launching. A wealthy donor who'd pledged substantial multi-year funding suddenly withdrew everything, publicly claiming he disagreed with Karen's radical feminist approach to helping women. Without that funding, they'd have to cut programs significantly, lay off staff, and turn away women who desperately needed help. Karen was devastated, feeling like she was failing the very people she'd promised to protect. Joe heard about the crisis through Ruth and did something completely unexpected that Karen never saw coming. He organized a massive grassroots fundraising campaign, leveraging every single connection he'd built in the non-profit world over the past 3 years. He called in favors, made personal appeals, and worked around the clock. Within 2 weeks, he'd raised enough to completely cover the funding gap from hundreds of small donations from people who believed in the mission. When he presented Karen with the results in her office, she stared at the numbers in complete disbelief. "How did you do this? This is impossible. I asked people who care about the work. Turns out there are thousands of them. You've built something that genuinely matters to people, Karen. They wanted to support it. I just gave them the opportunity. But why did you do this? You didn't have to get involved. This wasn't your crisis to solve." Joe looked at her with absolute sincerity that took her breath away. "Because the work matters more than my comfort or my pride. Because those programs help real people who desperately need help. Because watching you build something beautiful and then seeing it threatened made me want to fight for it. Not for you specifically, though I care about you. For the mission itself. For the women whose lives depend on those programs continuing." Karen felt something crack open inside her chest, some barrier she'd been maintaining through sheer force of will. This wasn't the selfish, self-centered man who'd humiliated her 3 years ago. This was someone who'd done genuinely selfless work for the pure purpose of protecting something important, expecting nothing in return. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite control. "This saved the foundation. You saved all those women's futures. The foundation saved itself by being worth saving. I just connected it to people who recognized that worth." Something hung between them in her office, unspoken but powerful and impossible to ignore. Finally, Karen said something that surprised even herself. "I'm going to therapy, specifically about us, about everything that happened. I need to process whether I'm actually considering reconciliation or if I'm just feeling gratitude for your help with the fundraising. I need professional help understanding my own feelings." Joe's eyes widened with cautious hope that he tried desperately to contain. "Take whatever time you need. If you decide you want nothing to do with me romantically, I'll respect that completely and continue doing the work. If you decide you want to explore possibility, I'll show up consistently and prove through actions that I'm worthy. Either way, the community work continues regardless. This isn't transactional." Karen wrestled with that question for weeks in intensive therapy sessions where she examined every angle of her feelings. Her therapist pushed her to be brutally honest about her motivations. Finally, after weeks of painful self-examination, she made a decision that terrified and excited her in equal measure. She called Joe and asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. They met at a quiet cafe, far from anywhere they might be recognized, both visibly nervous and uncertain. Karen spoke first, her prepared speech dissolving into raw honesty. "I've been thinking and doing intensive therapy about everything that happened between us, about who we were then and who we've both become now. Where does that leave us?" Joe asked, his voice carefully neutral, despite the hope she could see in his eyes. Karen took a deep breath, committing to the leap before she could talk herself out of it. "At a crossroads. I can continue being grateful for your transformation from a safe distance acknowledging your growth while maintaining complete separation. Or I can take a genuine chance on seeing if two completely different people could build something entirely new together. Not resume what we had, because that version of us is dead and buried, but build something entirely different from who we've both become through separate hard work. Joe's hand shook as he set down his coffee cup. Karen, I need to be absolutely clear about something before you make any decision. I will spend the rest of my life earning your trust if you give me this chance. I will show up consistently and prove through daily actions that I'm worthy of this gift. But I also know that I might never fully earn back what I destroyed that night. The hurt I caused was real and permanent. If you give me this chance, I promise you I won't waste a single moment of it. I'm not giving you anything yet, Karen said firmly, needing him to understand the terms completely. I'm saying I'm open to exploring possibility. That means dating slowly and carefully. That means you proving yourself through consistent action over time. That means I can walk away at any point if I see red flags or feel unsafe. Can you accept those terms without resentment? Absolutely. I'll take whatever chance you're willing to give on whatever terms you set. They started dating with extreme caution, like two people learning to walk on ice they're not sure will hold their weight. Joe showed up consistently for every date, every phone call, every moment. He was thoughtful without being excessive or performative. He respected her boundaries without question. He never pressured her for more physical or emotional intimacy than she was ready to give. Diane remained deeply skeptical, but ultimately supportive of her sister's choice. 6 months into their careful relationship, Joe did something that proved everything Karen needed to know. She came home late one night, absolutely exhausted from a devastating foundation crisis where they'd lost a major grant and had to deliver bad news to program participants. She expected to collapse into bed alone and cry herself to sleep. Instead, she found Joe in her apartment with the key she'd tentatively given him. He'd cooked her favorite comfort meal, drawn her a bath with expensive oils he'd researched, and had a heating pad ready for the chronic back pain he'd remembered her mentioning once months ago. I'm not trying to fix everything or solve your problems, he said gently, understanding exactly what she needed to hear. I just wanted to make your evening a little bit easier. You carry so much weight for so many people. Let me carry some of it tonight, Karen cried then. Not from sadness or frustration, but from being genuinely cared for by someone who saw her exhaustion and responded with pure compassion rather than trying to fix or dismiss or minimize. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me the chance to show up for you. It's a privilege I'll never take for granted, not for a single day. That night, falling asleep with Joe holding her gently and carefully, Karen realized something profound that settled deep in her bones. She wasn't settling for less than she deserved. She wasn't compromising her worth or accepting crumbs. She was choosing to build something entirely new with someone who'd proven himself worthy through years of consistent transformation with no guarantee of reward. And that choice felt powerful in a way that nothing else in her life had felt before. Chapter 10. The Queen's Crown. They dated for another year before Joe proposed, and even then it wasn't romantic or grandiose or anything resembling a fairy tale. They were hiking on a trail Karen loved, talking about the Foundation's latest expansion plans and debating the merits of different community partnership models. When Joe stopped walking abruptly and turned to her with eyes so serious she thought something was wrong. I need to ask you something important. Not because I think I deserve it, or because I've earned the right through some cosmic calculation, but because I've spent 3 years proving I'm worthy, and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Karen looked at the man before her and saw clearly who he'd become. Not the arrogant boy who'd humiliated her in front of 200 people. Not the broken person who'd spiraled after their breakup. But someone who'd rebuilt himself completely with painstaking care and shown up consistently for years without guarantee of reward. Yes, but we're doing this my way, with my terms. Prenuptial agreement protecting everything I built. Separate accounts. My name stays Smith professionally and personally. And if you ever publicly disrespect me again, you walk away with nothing and we're done permanently. Those are my non-negotiable terms. Joe didn't hesitate or flinch or show any sign of resistance. I accept every single one without reservation. I don't want your money. I don't want credit for your empire. I want the privilege of being your partner while you continue building something extraordinary. Everything else is just details. They married in the same ballroom where he'd once destroyed her, but this time everything was different in ways both subtle and profound. Small, intimate ceremony with family and close friends who'd witnessed both their destruction and their reconstruction. Karen wore a dress that made her feel powerful rather than pretty, armor disguised as elegance. Joe's vows destroyed everyone in attendance with their raw honesty. Karen, I broke you publicly in this room 3 years ago. I made you feel small when you deserved to feel extraordinary. Today I vow to build you up for the rest of my life, to make sure you never doubt your worth for even a moment. You are the most powerful woman I know, and that power terrified me once because I was weak. You didn't need saving. You saved yourself and built an empire while doing it. All I want is to be your partner, your supporter, and the man who makes sure you never forget how remarkable you are. I will earn this choice every single day, and if I ever fail, I'll walk away, knowing I had no right to this gift in the first place. Karen's vows were equally powerful, pulling no punches. Joe, you taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. You taught me that I was settling for less than I deserved, that I'd made myself small and convenient for people who didn't truly value me. That lesson built my empire and changed everything about how I see myself. You also taught me that people can genuinely transform if they do the brutal, uncomfortable work with no guarantee of reward. You earned this through years of consistent proof, not through apologies or promises. I'm not marrying who you were. I'm marrying who you became through your own effort and commitment. This is choice, not forgiveness. This is partnership, not rescue. Don't make me regret choosing you. The room erupted in applause that felt different from typical wedding celebrations. This wasn't just witnessing a union. This was witnessing a miracle of transformation and growth, and two people becoming worthy of each other. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale with easy, happy endings. It was work, real, hard, exhausting daily work that required constant attention and effort. Joe had to prove himself constantly, earning trust in tiny increments that built slowly over time. Karen had to learn to trust again, to lower her guard just enough to let someone in without becoming vulnerable to destruction. They had arguments about boundaries and independence and whose career took priority in any given moment. They struggled with balancing two ambitious careers and building a genuine partnership that served both of them. Some days were absolutely beautiful, filled with laughter and connection. Some days were brutal, filled with old wounds reopening and hard conversations that lasted until dawn. But they built something real and lasting, and worth the effort. Joe ran the community center programs with increasing responsibility and impact, earning respect throughout the non-profit world. Karen expanded her empire globally, opening hotels in countries that desperately needed the jobs and economic investment. They supported each other's work without competing or diminishing each other's accomplishments. When Karen had terrible days filled with impossible decisions and crushing weight, Joe showed up with patience and heating pads and quiet support. When Joe struggled with old shame that surfaced unexpectedly, Karen reminded him he'd earned his redemption through action and helped him find his way back to solid ground. 5 years into their marriage, Karen stood in her office looking at photographs from their entire journey spread across her desk. The engagement party disaster captured in a photo where her serene smile hid devastation. Her first press conference as CEO where she looked terrified but determined. The foundation launch where she'd cried while cutting the ribbon. Their wedding where they'd both looked simultaneously scared and hopeful. The birth of their twins, a boy and girl who looked like perfect combinations of both of them. Every image told a story of transformation and growth and becoming. Joe appeared at her door with coffee, a ritual they'd established over years together. "What are you thinking about?" About how far we've come. About how I almost didn't give you this chance because I was terrified of being hurt again. Would that have been wrong? If you'd decided I wasn't worth the risk?" Karen thought about that honestly, refusing to sugarcoat reality even now. No, it would have been completely valid self-protection, and nobody could have blamed me for that choice. But I'm glad I took the chance because it worked out. Not because you deserved it, but because I chose it from a position of strength, rather than weakness or loneliness or desperation. There's a difference. Every day I wake up grateful you chose strength over safety. Every day I try to earn that choice again. Their marriage wasn't perfect and never would be. Joe still had moments where old insecurities surfaced, and he questioned whether he truly deserved this life. Karen still had triggers when she felt disrespected or dismissed, moments when she'd flash back to that ballroom and feel small again before remembering who she'd become. But they worked through it with therapy and commitment and genuine love that had been earned through years of consistent proof rather than demanded through declarations. The foundation thrived beyond Karen's wildest dreams, helping thousands of women rebuild their lives with dignity and comprehensive support. The hotels expanded internationally, bringing jobs and opportunity to communities that had been forgotten and overlooked. Joe's programs helped thousands more rebuild their lives after hitting bottom, creating ripple effects of healing that spread far beyond anyone's initial vision. Together they built something that mattered beyond themselves, beyond their own story, beyond their own redemption. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to that ballroom one last time for a quiet, private moment. Joe looked around with wonder that hadn't diminished over the years. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if that night hadn't happened? If I'd just been a decent person from the start?" "All the time," Karen admitted. "If you'd been perfect, then I might never have discovered my own power or built any of this. If I'd been weaker, I might have stayed and enabled your mediocrity, and we both would have lived smaller lives. We needed to break apart completely, so we could both grow into people who could actually build something real and lasting. The timing was wrong, because we both needed to become better separately before we could be better together. Do you regret giving me another chance after everything I put you through?" Karen thought about their decade together with complete honesty. The struggles and triumphs, the work and reward, the real marriage with real challenges and real love that had been earned rather than assumed. No, not for a single moment, because you earned it. Not through apologies, but through years of consistent transformation. That's the lesson everyone misses about forgiveness and redemption. Forgiveness is free and costs nothing. Trust is earned slowly and painfully. Access is a privilege that must be proven. You earned all three through your own work, and I chose you from strength rather than weakness. That makes all the difference. Joe pulled her close, and they danced in the empty ballroom where everything had begun and ended and begun again, moving to music only they could hear. Some love stories are about finding the perfect person who never hurts you. This love story was about two wrong people doing the brutal, uncomfortable work of becoming right separately until they were worthy of each other and could build something beautiful together. And as Karen rested her head on Joe's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, she smiled with the same serene expression she'd worn when walking out of her engagement party a decade ago. Because the greatest revenge wasn't destroying the man who hurt you or making him suffer in proportion to your pain. It was becoming so powerful that you could choose to love him again after he'd genuinely earned it through years of consistent proof. But only after the work was done. Only when he'd proven himself completely transformed. Only when you chose from strength instead of weakness or loneliness or fear of being alone. That distinction made all the difference between settling for less and selecting the best. Between forgiving and rebuilding. Between the woman she'd been and the queen she'd become. And Karen Smith had always been a queen, even when she didn't know it herself. It just took public humiliation and an inherited empire and 10 years of transformation for everyone, including Joe and including Karen herself, to finally recognize what had been there all along, waiting to be discovered and claimed and built into something extraordinary. The ballroom lights dimmed as evening turned to night, but Karen and Joe kept dancing, kept holding each other, kept building their love through the simple act of showing up day after day after day. Because that's what real love was. Not fireworks and grand gestures and fairy tale endings, but two people who'd been broken, choosing to become whole separately, and then choosing to build something together that was stronger than either of them alone. And in the end, that choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than hurt, to grow rather than stagnate, made all the difference in a story that started with humiliation and ended with a crown earned rather than inherited.